My name is Dustin. I'm 35 years old, and I used to think I knew these woods better than anyone. 15 years as a welder will do that. You learn to trust what you can see, measure, and fix with your hands. But there's something in the East Texas pines that I never knew about until October of last year. I'm sitting in my kitchen in Conroe this morning, watching steam rise from my coffee mug while the neighborhood comes alive around me. School buses rumbling past, dogs barking, lawnmowers starting up. Normal sounds that used to comfort me. Now they feel fragile, like a thin shell protecting us from what's really out there. People think welding is just about melting metal, but it's not. It's about understanding materials, knowing how much stress they can take before they break. The military taught me the same thing about people and situations. You assess, you prepare, you execute, simple. That's why what happened at our deer lease doesn't make sense. I've been hunting those same 200 acres near Huntsville for over a decade. I know every game trail, every creek crossing, every stand location. I understand the rhythms of white-tailed deer, the patterns of predators, the way sound carries through pine timber in a different weather. Or at least I thought I did. My Duluth trading pants still hang in the closet upstairs, the knees reinforced from crawling through brush. My Filson vest with all its pockets for calls and gear. My broken-in Danner boots that have walked hundreds of miles through those woods, all of it waiting for a hunting season I'm not sure I can face. The thing is, I'm not some city boy who jumped at shadows. I did 2 tours overseas, learned to trust my instincts when something felt wrong. Those instincts kept me alive in places where hesitation meant body bags. But nothing, not IEDs, not firefights, not the worst humanity could throw at each other, prepared me for what we encountered in those woods. My Remington 870 sits in the gun safe, cleaned and oiled like always. 12-gauge buckshot, reliable as sunrise. It should have been enough. Hell, it should have been overkill for anything we might run into on a Texas deer lease. I've been trying to tell myself it was stress, maybe some kind of shared hallucination brought on by isolation and too much coffee around the campfire. But the claw marks on my truck's tailgate tell a different story. 3 parallel gouges, each one exactly 3 inches long, carved deep enough into the metal that I had to have them welded over. I used to think I understood what lived in the East Texas pines. I was wrong about everything. The October morning Brandon called about the lease, I was already thinking about deer season. My brother-in-law's voice carried that familiar excitement through the phone. Our annual hunting trip was 2 weeks out, and Tyler would be joining us for the first time as a full participant, not just tagging along. Kid's been practicing with that .30-06 all summer, Brandon said. Put 3 shots in a 2-inch group at 100 yards yesterday. I smiled, remembering my own first real hunt at 16. Tyler had earned this. At 35, I'd been hunting those same 200 acres near Huntsville since my early 20s. Knew every deer trail and creek crossing. The Peterson lease had become our October tradition. 3 days of hunting, poker, and the kind of male bonding that suburban life rarely afforded. That evening, Tyler helped me organize gear in the garage. The familiar ritual: cleaning my Remington 870, checking ammunition, packing my Filson vest with calls and scent eliminators, the smell of gun oil mixed with autumn streaming through the open door. Uncle Dustin, think we'll see that big 8-pointer you showed me from last year's camera? Tyler asked, carefully arranging his hunting clothes in his duffel bag. Maybe. Deer patterns change, though. That's why we scout first day. I watched him handle his gear with the reverence of youth. Everything was new, significant, worthy of careful attention. Brandon arrived Friday morning with his truck loaded, coolers, camp chairs, enough provisions for a week, though we'd only stay 3 days. We'd done this dance so many times it felt choreographed. Tyler bounced between us, asking questions about wind direction and stand placement. "Remember, it's not just about the harvest," I told him as we loaded the last of the gear. "It's about understanding the woods, reading sign, becoming part of the ecosystem instead of fighting against it." Tyler nodded solemnly, absorbing every word like gospel. Janet kissed me goodbye on the front steps, reminding me to text when we arrived, despite knowing cell service was spotty out there. Normal domestic concerns. Normal life. "Bring home some meat," she said, squeezing my hand. "Always do." As my truck pulled out of our subdivision, I felt that familiar anticipation building. 3 days in the East Texas pines, away from welding shop deadlines and suburban obligations. Just the woods, the deer, and the ancient rhythm, predator and prey. I had no idea how right I was about that last part, or how wrong I was about which role we'd be playing. The drive to our lease always felt like traveling backward through time. Highway 45 gave way to Farm Road 1374, then to increasingly narrow county roads that wound deeper into the East Texas pines. Brandon rode shotgun, studying his phone's hunting app while he still had signal. Tyler sprawled across the back seat, earbuds in, probably watching hunting videos on his tablet. "Remember your first time out here?" Brandon asked, glancing at Tyler in the rear-view mirror. I smiled, downshifting as we hit the gravel road. "Back when we first started coming. You were so nervous you forgot to load your rifle." "I was not nervous," Brandon protested, but his grin gave him away. "I was being cautious." The familiar landmarks rolled past, the rusted mailbox marking old Peterson's property line, the lightning-split oak we'd used as a reference point for years, the cattle guard that announced we'd reached our section of the woods. 200 acres of mixed pine and hardwood, thick enough to hide a dozen deer and quiet enough to hear your own heartbeat. Tyler pulled out his earbuds as we turned onto the final stretch. "Man, it's really out here, isn't it?" He was right. The canopy had thickened overhead, filtering the afternoon sunlight into dappled patches on the dirt road. Ancient pines towered on both sides, their trunks disappearing into shadow. This was old forest, the kind that had stood before Texas was even Texas. My phone showed the last bar of signal fade to nothing. Complete isolation, just how we liked it. No work calls, no distractions, just 3 days of hunting and the kind of quiet you can't find in Conroe. The cabin appeared around the final bend, exactly as we'd left it in January. Weathered wood siding, metal roof, solar panel glinting on the south-facing slope. Home away from home. I'd helped build this place with my own hands, knew every board and nail. "There she is," Brandon said with satisfaction. I parked beside the cabin and killed the engine. The silence hit immediately. No traffic, no air conditioners, no suburban hum. Just the whisper of wind through pine needles and the distant call of a hawk. Tyler stepped out, stretching. "It's so quiet." "That's the point," I said, already unloading our gear. "City noise spooks the deer." But as I hefted my rifle case from the truck bed, something felt different. The silence seemed heavier somehow, more complete than usual. Even the insects had gone quiet. I shook off the feeling. All those years hunting these woods, and they'd never let me down yet. The wrongness struck me first. After more than a decade in these woods, I knew every sound the East Texas forest should make. October afternoons meant squirrels chattering through the pines, woodpeckers working dead timber, the rustle of armadillos rooting through fallen leaves. But as Brandon, Tyler, and I spread out to scout our stands that first afternoon, the woods felt wrong, hollow. I was following an old game trail toward Willow Creek when I found them. The tracks pressed deep into the soft mud near the water's edge stopped me cold. At first glance, they looked canine, elongated paw prints with distinct toe marks. But the size made my stomach drop. Each print measured nearly 8 inches long, wider than my outstretched hand. The depth told me whatever made them carried serious weight. I knelt down, studying the impressions with the methodical attention my military training had drilled into me. The spacing between prints was all wrong, too far apart for any four-legged animal I knew. And the gait pattern, it looked like something walking upright, placing one foot directly in front of the other. But what really sent ice through my veins were the claw marks. 3 parallel gouges extended beyond each toe print, carved deep into the creek bank's clay. I'd seen bear sign before, but these claws had to be 3 inches long, maybe longer. "Dustin," Tyler's voice echoed from somewhere upstream. "You need to see this." I found him crouched beside a massive pine, his face pale beneath his ranger's cap. More tracks circled the tree's base, and about 7 feet up the trunk, fresh bark hung in strips. Claw marks scored the wood in sets of 4, gouged so deep I could stick my fingers inside them. "What the hell did this?" Tyler muttered. I ran my thumb along one of the gouges, feeling the rough edges where something had torn through the bark like paper. The marks were too high for any dog, too precise for a bear. And they were fresh, sap still bleeding from the wounds. The forest pressed in around us, that unnatural quiet making every small sound seem amplified. No birds called, no insects hummed. Even the wind seemed to have died. "We should head back," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. As we turned toward camp, I caught movement in my peripheral vision. Just a shadow shifting between the pines, too quick to focus on. But for a split second, I could have sworn I saw something tall and dark watching us from the timber. Something that stood like a man. By 4:30 that afternoon, I knew something was fundamentally wrong with our lease. I'd positioned myself in the old ladder stand overlooking the creek bottom. Prime real estate where we'd taken deer every season for the past 8 years. Perfect wind direction, fresh acorn drop, well-worn trails crisscrossing the clearing like highways. Brandon had spotted fresh rubs on the drive in, and Tyler confirmed scrapes near the feeder that morning. Everything screamed that deer should be moving, but the woods were dead. Not just quiet, dead. In all my years hunting these East Texas pines, I'd never experienced silence like this. No squirrels chattering in the oaks, no woodpeckers hammering dead snags. Even the ever-present buzz of mosquitoes had vanished, leaving an oppressive vacuum that made my ears ring. I checked my watch. Prime time. Golden hour when whitetails should be filtering into the open, cautious but hungry. Instead, nothing moved except shadows growing longer through the pines. My military training had taught me to trust environmental cues. In Iraq, you learned to read the street when dogs stopped barking, when children disappeared from doorways, when the normal rhythm of a neighborhood shifted. Those subtle changes kept you alive. The forest was sending the same signals now. I glassed the tree line with my binoculars, scanning methodically from left to right. Movement caught my eye near the far edge of the clearing, a flash of brown that should have been deer. But when I focused on the spot, nothing. Just pine trunks and fading light, playing tricks. The feeling of being watched crawled up my spine like ice water. Not the casual observation of woodland creatures, but something focused and intelligent. Something that understood I was there and found me interesting. I'd felt this before. In abandoned buildings in Fallujah, the weight of hostile attention from something that wanted to remain unseen. 6 o'clock came and went. Then 7. As darkness crept through the understory, that unnatural silence pressed against me like a physical thing. Even the wind seemed muted, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. When I climbed down, my hands shook slightly on the ladder rungs. Not from cold, the October evening was mild. From the growing certainty that whatever had left those massive tracks was out there, watching, waiting. And every deer on the property knew it. As I walked back toward camp, my Danner boots crunching on fallen leaves sounded unnaturally loud in the dead air. Behind me, I could swear I heard something else moving, pacing me through the trees. But every time I turned around, the forest stood empty and silent as a tomb. Back at camp, we tried to shake off the day's strangeness. Brandon had gotten a small fire going while Tyler organized our gear with the nervous energy of a kid trying to stay busy. I cleaned my Remington 8.7. Oh, the familiar ritual calming my mind. Tonight it felt like whistling past a graveyard. Maybe better luck tomorrow, Brandon said, poking at the flames. Could be the deer are just spooked by hunters in other sections. I nodded, not mentioning that I'd seen no sign of other hunters. No tire tracks, no distant shots, nothing. In over a decade coming here, I'd never seen the woods this empty. Tyler was heating up a can of chili when the first howl drifted through the pines. We all froze. It started low and mournful, like a wolf calling across the darkness. Normal enough for East Texas, though wolves had been gone from these parts for decades. But as the sound continued, something in my gut clenched tight. The howl climbed higher, then dropped into a series of shorter calls that sounded almost conversational, like it was testing different tones and different patterns. There was a deliberate quality to it that made my skin crawl. "That's weird," Tyler whispered, moving closer to the fire. Brandon forced a laugh. "Probably just coyotes. They can make all kinds of crazy sounds." But I'd heard plenty of coyotes during my deployments. This wasn't that. This had too much control, too much intention behind it. Each note seemed carefully chosen, like someone learning to speak a foreign language. Then it came again from a different direction, maybe 200 yards east. Same unnatural cadence, same unsettling intelligence in the vocalizations. Whatever was making that sound had moved fast and silent through dense undergrowth. A third howl answered from the south, completing a triangle around our camp. Years of combat experience took over, automatically mapping their positions, calculating fields of fire, 3 contacts, coordinated movement, high ground advantage. "Uncle Dustin?" Tyler's voice was small. The fire suddenly felt pathetic against the pressing darkness. Those calls weren't random animal sounds. They were communication, planned, purposeful. I checked my shotgun's chamber, the metallic sound sharp in the night air. "Probably nothing, Tyler. Just keep close to the fire." But my hands were steady in a way they hadn't been since Kandahar, and every instinct I'd learned to trust was screaming that we were being evaluated by something that understood exactly what we were. The howling stopped as abruptly as it began, leaving only the crackling flames and the weight of eyes watching from the darkness. I woke to Brandon shaking my shoulder, his face pale in the gray dawn light, filtering through the cabin windows. "Dustin, you need to see this." The sharp scent of rubber and metal hit me before I even stepped outside. My Ford's front tires were shredded, not punctured, but torn open like tissue paper. 3 parallel gashes ran deep through the steel-belted radials, each cut precise and deliberate. The morning mist clung to the truck's frame, making the damage look surreal, like something from a nightmare. "Jesus Christ," I whispered, running my weathered fingers along the claw marks. The cuts were too clean, too purposeful. Whatever did this had taken its time. Brandon pointed to the ground around the truck. Fresh tracks circled our vehicle in a perfect perimeter, each print pressed deep into the damp earth. The same massive paw prints from yesterday, but now there were dozens of them, forming a methodical pattern around our entire campsite. "It was watching us sleep," Tyler said from the cabin doorway, his voice barely steady. "Look at the windows." Muddy smears marked every window at eye level if you were 7 feet tall. The thing had moved around our cabin like a predator studying prey, testing our defenses while we slept 20 feet away. Every tactical lesson I'd learned in the sandbox came flooding back. We were isolated. No cell service, no radio contact, and now no vehicle. The nearest neighbor was 12 miles through dense forest, and whatever was out there knew these woods better than we did. "It's hurting us," I said, the realization hitting like ice water in my veins. "Keeping us here." Brandon's nervous laugh died in his throat. "Come on, Dustin. It's just some big dog, maybe a—" "Dogs don't slash tires." I shouldered my Remington 870, checking the action. Dogs don't circle camps like military reconnaissance. The forest around us remained unnaturally silent. No birds, no insects, nothing but the whisper of wind through pine needles. Even the squirrels had abandoned this place. Tyler stayed close as we examined the perimeter, his 16-year-old bravado finally cracking. I'd seen that look before. In Afghanistan, when young soldiers realized the enemy was smarter than they'd expected. The tracks led away from camp in multiple directions, then converged at the tree line like spokes on a wheel. Whatever was out there had spent hours studying us, learning our patterns, our weaknesses, and now it was waiting for us to make the next move. The afternoon heat pressed down as we started hiking the old game trail toward the main road. 12 miles through dense pine, but what choice did we have? My Remington 870 felt reassuring in my hands, but after our slashed tires that morning, nothing felt quite right anymore. "Uncle Dustin, how far to the highway?" Tyler's voice carried that forced calm teenagers use when they're trying not to sound scared. 12 miles, I said, scanning the tree line, but we take it slow, stay alert. The forest remained unnaturally quiet. No birds, no squirrels chattering in the canopy, just our boots crunching on pine needles and the whisper of wind through branches. Brandon moved ahead of us, studying something in the underbrush. "More tracks here. Fresh ones." I moved up beside him, keeping Tyler close. The prints were clear in the soft earth. Massive, elongated paw shapes with deep claw gouges extending 3 inches beyond each toe. But it was the stride length that made my stomach clench. Whatever left these was moving on 2 legs, not 4. "We keep moving," I said, but my voice sounded hollow even to me. That's when I caught the smell. Wet fur and something wilder, more primal than any animal I'd encountered in all my years of hunting. The scent hung heavy in the air, making the hair on my arms stand up. I turned, following that wild musk, and found myself staring into a thicket of young pines about 30 yards off the trail. The shadows were deep there, almost black in the afternoon sun. And something was staring back. 2 amber yellow eyes, reflecting light like polished brass, watched us from the darkness. But they were wrong, too high off the ground, too intelligent, too focused. A wolf's eyes at the height of a tall man's head. Every survival instinct I developed in combat screamed danger, but I couldn't move. Those eyes held me frozen, studying me with an intelligence that made my blood turn cold. This wasn't the vacant stare of prey or the simple hunger of a predator. This was calculation. "Dustin?" Brandon's voice seemed to come from very far away. The eyes blinked once deliberately, and I caught a glimpse of something massive shifting behind the pine boughs. Dark fur, shoulders too broad for any natural animal. Then the eyes were gone, vanished, without a sound of retreat. "We run," I whispered, my throat dry as dust. "We run now." But even as we stumbled back down the trail toward our disabled truck, I knew with sick certainty that whatever owned those amber eyes wasn't done with us yet. We'd been walking the fence line for maybe 20 minutes when Brandon suddenly stopped dead. I was behind him, scanning the tree line with my Remington ready, when I heard his sharp intake of breath. "Uncle Dustin." His voice came out as barely a whisper. "There's something in those pines." I followed his gaze toward a thick stand of loblolly pines about 60 yards out. At first I saw nothing but shadows and undergrowth. Then Tyler grabbed my arm with trembling fingers. It's standing up." That's when I saw it. The thing rose from behind a fallen log like some nightmare-given form, 7 feet tall, maybe 8, hunched forward in a way that made my spine crawl. Massive shoulders tapered down to a narrower waist, the whole frame covered in shaggy dark brown fur that looked matted and wild. But it was the head that made every instinct scream warnings. Wolf-like skull positioned too upright on a neck that bent wrong for any animal I'd ever seen. Those amber yellow eyes locked onto us with unmistakable intelligence. Not the simple awareness of a deer or even the cunning of a coyote. This was something that understood what it was looking at, something that was making decisions. The elongated muzzle hung slightly open, revealing yellowed teeth that caught the filtered sunlight. Even from this distance, I could see the wrongness of its posture, bipedal but alien, like watching a man's shadow stretched into something predatory and unnatural. "Jesus Christ," I breathed, raising the shotgun instinctively. The creature's head tilted at the movement, those intelligent eyes tracking the barrel. Its legs, digitigrade, like a wolf's but supporting an upright torso, shifted as it studied us. The way it moved through the undergrowth without disturbing so much as a branch defied every hunting instinct I'd developed over 2 decades in these woods. Tyler was hyperventilating beside me. "What is that thing? What the hell is that?" I wanted to tell him I didn't know, wanted to rationalize it as a bear, a trick of shadows, anything my practical mind could accept. But those eyes held mine with calculating patience, and I knew we were looking at something that had been watching us far longer than we'd been aware of it. The creature took one deliberate step backward, never breaking eye contact, and melted into the pines like smoke. Gone so completely it might have been a hallucination, except for Tyler's panicked breathing and the 3-inch claw marks we'd find gouged deep in that fallen log when we finally worked up the courage to investigate. The second night, it started testing us. I'd barricaded the cabin windows with whatever furniture we could move. Brandon's old hunting table, Tyler's cot, even the propane tank from outside. My Remington 870 stayed loaded across my knees while I took first watch. The forest had gone dead quiet again, that unnatural silence that made my skin crawl. Around midnight, something massive bumped the north wall. The entire cabin shuddered. Tyler jerked awake on his sleeping bag, eyes wide. Brandon sat up slowly, gripping his rifle. "What was that?" Tyler whispered. I held up a hand for silence. We waited. 5 minutes passed. Then another deliberate impact against the east wall, like something the size of a refrigerator testing the structure's weak points. "It's probing," I said, recognizing the pattern from combat. "Checking our defenses." Brandon's face went pale in the lantern light. "That's not animal behavior, Dustin." The thing moved to the south wall next. This time, we heard the scraping. Long, deliberate scratches against the wooden siding. Through the gaps in our barricade, I caught a glimpse of amber eyes reflecting our lantern's glow. They studied us with calculating intelligence before disappearing. For 3 hours it circled, testing each wall, each window, each potential entry point. The methodical nature of its reconnaissance chilled me more than any roar or charge would have. This wasn't mindless aggression. This was tactical assessment. When dawn finally broke, I found the evidence of its intelligence carved into our walls. 3-inch claw marks gouged deep into the wood, but not random scratches. They formed deliberate patterns around each window frame, like it was mapping structural weaknesses. The marks near the door were different, shorter, more controlled, as if it had been feeling for the lock mechanism. "Jesus Christ," Brandon breathed, running his fingers along the gouges. "Look at the spacing. It was using its claws like tools." The worst discovery came at the back window. The creature had managed to work one of the boards loose from our barricade. Not torn, carefully pried, leaving the nails intact. If we hadn't heard it moving, it could have entered silently. Tyler found muddy prints on the windowsill, each one showing those impossibly long toes and curved claws. But what made my blood freeze was the handprint beside them, if you could call it that. 5 elongated digits pressed into the wood, too large for any human but showing deliberate placement. "It was trying to open the window," Tyler said, his voice cracking. I stared at those marks, my practical mind struggling with the implications. Whatever was hunting us didn't just have intelligence. It understood human construction, human behavior. It was learning. By noon the next day, I learned something that shattered every assumption I'd carried about predators and prey. This thing hunted in broad daylight. We'd spent the morning reinforcing the cabin's windows with furniture, but staying inside felt like waiting to die. Brandon suggested we make another run for the main road. Maybe we could outpace it in daylight, use our human endurance advantage. That was our first mistake, thinking we had any advantage at all. 20 minutes into our hike south, I spotted movement through the pine trunks. Something massive keeping pace with us, maybe 60 yards out. The dark shape moved with impossible silence for its size, flowing between trees like smoke. "Left flank," I whispered to Brandon and Tyler, slipping into combat mode without thinking. Something's tracking us. We adjusted course southeast, trying to break contact. Within minutes, I caught another glimpse, this time on our right. The thing had circled us, in daylight, moving faster than anything that size should move. Then Tyler pointed ahead. "Uncle Dustin, look." Fresh tracks crossed our path. Those same digitigrade prints, but these were different. Longer strides, deeper impressions. It had been running. Recently. The tactical picture became clear with sickening certainty. We weren't escaping. We were being herded. Every time we tried to angle toward the highway, we'd catch sight of that massive form repositioning itself, cutting off our route. When we turned back toward the cabin, the pressure eased. The message was unmistakable. "You go where I allow you to go." "This is wrong," Brandon muttered, scanning the tree line. "Wolves don't hunt like this. Nothing hunts like this." But I was starting to understand. This wasn't just predatory behavior, it was tactical. The creature was demonstrating control, showing us that our freedom of movement existed entirely at its discretion. Every combat instructor I'd ever had would have recognized the pattern. Psychological warfare. We found ourselves back at the cabin within 2 hours, having walked in a perfect circle. The thing had guided us home like a sheepdog working livestock. As we barricaded the door again, I realized the most terrifying truth yet. This wasn't random animal aggression or territorial defense. The creature was playing with us, studying us. It could have killed us at any point during that hike, but it chose not to. Instead, it was teaching us a lesson about who really controlled these woods. The sun was still high overhead, and I finally understood why the forest had gone silent. Everything else had already learned what we were just discovering. When something that intelligent starts hunting, even daylight offers no sanctuary. The creek was our mistake. Brandon had insisted on refilling our water bottles there, despite my protests. "It's 50 yards, he'd said. "I'll be quick." I should have stopped him. Should have trusted the ice in my gut that screamed trap. Tyler and I watched from the cabin porch as Brandon picked his way down the muddy bank. The forest pressed in around him, unnaturally silent. No birds, no insects. Even the creek seemed to whisper instead of babble. That's when I saw it. The thing rose from the brush behind Brandon like a shadow given form. Same creature we'd glimpsed before, but this time I could see details that would haunt me. The way its chest expanded with each silent breath. The subtle twitching of ears that tracked every sound we made. In daylight, its fur showed reddish undertones beneath the dark brown, matted in places like it had been rolling in something. What struck me most was its stillness. Complete, predatory patience. Not the nervous energy of a wild animal, but the controlled calm of something that had already decided how this would end. Its nostrils flared, scenting the air, and I watched those amber eyes process information like a hunter reading sign. This wasn't instinct, this was analysis. Brandon knelt at the water's edge, completely unaware. The creature could have torn him apart in seconds. Instead, it watched, learning. "Brandon," I whispered, my voice barely carrying, "don't move." Something in my tone made him freeze. The thing's massive head swiveled toward me, and for one heart-stopping moment we stared at each other across 40 yards of Texas wilderness. Its muzzle worked the air, scenting us, cataloging us, understanding us. Tyler's sharp intake of breath seemed to break whatever spell held the moment. The creature's attention shifted to him, then back to Brandon, as if calculating angles and distances, making decisions. Then it simply stepped back, melted into the undergrowth with the same impossible silence it had emerged with. Only the bent branches and a single massive footprint in the mud proved it had been there at all. Brandon stumbled back up the bank, water bottles forgotten, his face white as bone. "Did you see?" "Yeah." My hands shook as I chambered around in the Remington. "I saw it." The thing had shown us its hand. We were alive because it chose to let us live. For now. I thought I understood fear after 2 tours in Afghanistan. I was wrong. The end came at 2:47 a.m. Not the careful probing we'd endured for hours, but deliberate destruction. The front door exploded inward, sending splinters across the cabin floor like shrapnel. My Remington was in my hands before I was fully awake, muscle memory overriding the shock. It had to duck to fit through the doorway. The smell hit first, wet fur and something older, wilder, like rotting leaves and copper. Inside the cabin it seemed even more massive than before, filling the space with a presence that made the walls feel like they were closing in. The creature moved differently indoors, each step deliberate and measured, claws clicking against the wooden floor like a dog's nails on tile. That sound, so mundane, so wrong, made my skin crawl worse than any growl could have. "Jesus Christ," Brandon whispered from his corner, rifle trembling in his grip. Tyler pressed himself against the back wall, hyperventilating. Its head swiveled between us with mechanical precision, and I noticed for the first time the scars crisscrossing its muzzle. Old wounds. This thing had fought before and won. It could have killed us instantly. Instead, it stepped inside. The floorboards groaned under its weight as it moved deeper into the cabin, head swiveling between us with methodical assessment. This wasn't hunting behavior. This was evaluation, research. The realization that we were being cataloged by something that understood tactics better than most soldiers I'd served with sent panic clawing up my throat. "Back off!" I shouted, raising the shotgun. The creature's amber eyes fixed on me with what I can only describe as amusement. It had watched us for days, learned our weapons, our movements. It knew exactly what that Remington could do, and it didn't care. The massive head tilted, almost conversational. The elongated muzzle opened slightly, releasing a sound between a growl and something disturbingly close to speech. Not words, but the cadence was wrong for any animal I knew. Tyler sobbed. The creature's attention snapped to him, and for the first time I saw genuine interest in those intelligent eyes. It took another step forward, digitigrade feet, silent despite their size. "Stay away from him," Brandon snarled, and his rifle cracked. The bullet caught the creature high in the shoulder, spinning it sideways. Dark blood sprayed across the cabin wall, and for one impossible moment I saw surprise in those amber eyes, then rage. The howl that erupted from its throat wasn't entirely animal. It was fury and intelligence combined, the sound of something ancient being challenged by prey that had forgotten its place. The creature wheeled toward Brandon, massive form moving with liquid grace despite the wound. But instead of attacking, it stopped, studied him. The amber eyes flicked between the three of us one final time as if memorizing faces. Then it turned to leave, and Brandon made the mistake of being too close to the door. One massive arm swept sideways as it crashed through the doorway. Almost casual, an afterthought, and those 3-inch claws raked across Brandon's shoulder. He screamed and went down hard, blood already soaking through his flannel. The creature didn't even look back, leaving behind splintered wood, the metallic scent of blood, and the terrible knowledge that we'd survived only because it chose to let us live. Outside, branches snapped as something massive moved through the forest. But the sounds were retreating. For now. Dawn couldn't come fast enough. I'd been staring at the splintered doorframe for hours. Brandon's blood-stained bandage wrapped tight around his shoulder, where the creature's claws had caught him during its retreat. None of us had slept after watching that thing study us like specimens before Brandon's desperate shot drove it back into the darkness. "We leave now," I said, checking my Remington one last time. 12 miles to the main road. We stay together no matter what. Tyler's face was pale but determined. Brandon nodded, wincing as he shouldered his rifle. The kid had grown up overnight, and my brother-in-law had proven he could bleed for family when it counted. We stepped into the gray pre-dawn light, and I immediately felt its presence. Not close, maybe 100 yards out, but pacing us. The forest remained unnaturally silent, as if every living thing had fled this creature's domain. My legs burned after the first mile. These weren't hunting trails we were following, just deer paths and compass headings through thick East Texas pine. Behind us, branches snapped with deliberate rhythm. It wasn't hiding anymore. "Uncle Dustin," Tyler whispered, pointing to our left. Through the trees, maybe 50 yards parallel to our path, I caught glimpses of dark fur moving between the trunks. The Dogman was herding us again, but this time toward the road instead of back to the cabin. We walked for 3 hours. My calves cramped. Brandon's breathing grew labored, blood seeping through his makeshift bandage. But every time we slowed, that rhythmic crashing would move closer, urging us forward. It was letting us leave. The realization hit me like ice water. This wasn't escape. It was dismissal. The creature had studied us, tested us, maybe even played with us, and now it was escorting trespassers off its territory. We were alive because it chose to let us live. When the sound of highway traffic finally reached us through the trees, those amber eyes appeared one last time. The massive form stood motionless between 2 pines, watching as we stumbled toward civilization. Its elongated muzzle tilted slightly, almost like a nod of acknowledgement. Then it turned and melted back into the forest. The Texas Department of Public Safety trooper who found us on Farm Road 1374 said we looked like we'd been through hell. Dehydration, he figured. Maybe got turned around in the woods. He drove us to my truck, helped us change the shredded tires with my spare and a donut I kept in the toolbox. "Y'all be careful out there," the trooper said. "Been getting some strange reports from hunters this season, folks seeing things that don't make much sense." I wanted to tell him everything. Instead, I just nodded and shook his hand. As we drove away from those woods, I kept checking the rear-view mirror. Not for the creature. I knew it was done with us. I was checking to see if I could spot the exact moment when the normal world ended and something older began. I never could find that line. That was a year ago. I'm sitting in my kitchen in Conroe this morning watching October sunlight filter through the same windows where I once felt safe. My coffee's gone cold in my hands, but I can't seem to move. Can't shake the feeling that even here, surrounded by suburban normalcy, something ancient is still watching. The nightmares started the week we got back. Not the usual combat dreams, those I could handle. These were different. Amber eyes studying me through glass, the sound of claws testing door frames, that elongated muzzle breathing fog against windows while I slept. Helpless. Janet noticed first. How I'd check every lock twice before bed. How I'd installed motion sensors around our property, claiming it was for security. She's a nurse. She recognizes trauma when she sees it. But how do you explain to your wife that the world contains predators we've forgotten existed? That intelligence doesn't always come with opposable thumbs and college degrees? I tried going back to the woods once. Different lease, different county, lasted maybe 30 minutes before the familiar weight of being observed sent me scrambling back to my truck. My Danner boots, the ones that had carried me through Afghanistan and all those years of Texas hunting, couldn't take another step into those trees. Brandon won't talk about it. Says it was just a big wolf. Maybe rabid, maybe protecting cubs. His mind's built walls around what happened, and maybe that's healthier. Tyler's different, though. The kid's got questions I can't answer about things that shouldn't exist, but do. 3 weeks ago, the Huntsville Item ran a story about hikers reporting unusual wildlife encounters near the Sam Houston National Forest. Large bipedal tracks, coordinated howling. One group mentioned amber eyes watching from tree lines, too high up to belong to any known animal. I called the reporter, told her I had information about her story. We met at a coffee shop in town, and I watched her expression change as I talked, skepticism melting into something else when I showed her the photos on my phone. Those massive claw marks in our cabin door, the shredded tire treads, Tyler's shaky video of something massive moving through distant pines. She didn't publish my account. Said the paper couldn't verify extraordinary claims, but she gave me her card, told me other people had called with similar stories, people who'd seen things in the deep woods that didn't fit any textbook. That's why I'm telling this now. Not for believers, they'll understand without explanation. Not for skeptics. They've already decided what's possible. I'm telling this for the hunters, the hikers, the families planning weekend trips to East Texas forests. Something did follow us home from those woods. Not physically, but the knowledge that we share this world with intelligences older and more patient than our own. The Dogman let us live. Let us carry its message back to civilization. These forests aren't empty. They never were. Respect what you don't understand, because it's been watching us far longer than we've been watching it. And sometimes when you're very unlucky, it decides to watch back.